I'm Sari Cooper, a certified sex therapist and sex coach in New York City. I'll be your host to Sex Esteem, a new show where we will explore in all its expressions relationships and sex in the modern world. Tune in for fun-filled facts and entertaining tips to having a more pleasurable sex life. So welcome, everyone, to another great interview today for Sex Esteem. And I'm so excited to have my colleague and friend, Joe Kort, who's the clinical director and founder of the Center for Relationship and Sexual Health in Royal Oak, Michigan. He's a board-certified clinical sexologist, author of 4 books, a lecturer, a facilitator of therapeutic workshops, and throughout his 36 years of private practice, he successfully has utilized varying therapy modalities to help hundreds of individuals and couples improve their lives and strengthen their relationships. Dr. Kort specializes in marital problems and conflicts, mixed orientation marriages, male sexuality, and sexual health concerns. He also treats sex addiction, or what we like to call out of control sexual behaviors, sexual identity issues, childhood sexual abuse. He's LGBTQIA affirmative, and he also practices imago relationship therapy. He's trained in a technique we call EMDR, which stands for eye movement desensitization reprocessing, a safe and effective treatment that can help patients who have suffered for years with anxiety from trauma, nightmares, insomnia, abuse, and other traumatic events. Dr. Kort is recently credited for creating the term side for gay men who don't engage in anal penetrative sex or intercourse. And so that's what prompted, Joe and I have known each other for many years. And it's this recent I would say, acceptance and acknowledgement that of being a side that I really wanted to talk to you about today. So welcome, Joe.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, and thanks for wanting to speak about something so important to me and to a lot of gay men.
All right. So side is a term you've coined, you've promoted it. And so can you briefly define it for our listeners and talk about why the language we use is so important?
Yeah. In the gay male community, when it comes down to intercourse, anal intercourse, there's usually a guy that's a top, the one who gives anal sex, the guy who's the bottom who receives anal sex, and then you could be verse, right? You could go either way, or you could be top verse, mostly a top, once in a while bottom, or a bottom verse. But there was no room for anybody like me who doesn't like anal intercourse. I've never tried it. I've never topped. I've never bottomed. I had a lot of shame about it for a long time because in the community, that's the go to. And it's gotten even more so over time to be the go to for how people hook up or how people partner. So one day I was talking to some friends, and this was like in the late 2000s, and I said, what if I'm not a top and I'm not a bottom? Maybe I'm a side. And we all laughed like I was thinking about a box. And then I thought, why is that funny? Why can't that be the word that top and bottom is? So I wrote an article in 2013 in Huffington Post, and that's when it all started to take off.
You know what I think is so interesting about it is how it mirrors so much in the heterosexual community of the gold standard being, you know, when people say, "Did you have sex?" They're really talking about penetrative sex, and it's so, you know, it's interesting and understandable in some ways that this kind of gold standard of what real sex is reflected in the gay community as well.
It's very heteronormative. It really is. It's a carryover. And you're right because people, well, they'll say to me, well, then if you don't have intercourse, then you're asexual. No, that means you're not having sex, or you don't, that's something different. Oh, then maybe you haven't found the right guy, like they used to say to lesbians. You just haven't found the right, or you haven't had it done well or right. It's all this pathology rather than all the things we do before intercourse and all the things we do after intercourse is still sex. You
Right.
know that.
We do. We always talk about the big umbrella of sex, right? And that it's all sex, right? And media really just helps to keep pushing that message of sex is penetrative sex. So, and if you're not having it, then you're not really having sex, and there's something wrong with you. It's a pathology. So recently, Grinder added the classification side next to top and bottom. So, what was it like for you to see the term that you authenticated put up that way?
It's still really exciting for me and honoring of me and my work. Because I didn't invent the idea that gay men exist that don't like penetrative sex. That's been always the case. There was many studies that are early on, but nobody had a word for it. And so woke up one day and people were blowing up my phone. Not only is Side now being used in Grinder, which is the gay male dating and hookup app, but you're credited everywhere with it. And I I was surprised because in the gay male community, there's not a lot of honoring of each other. There's just not. There is in the lesbian community. I'm Jewish. There is a lot of honoring of other Jewish experts in the field in fields, but not in the gay male. So I didn't expect. I just didn't expect it. It was so. I still feel so good about it.
Congratulations. So,
Thank
what
you.
what do you think are sort of the domino effect, and what have you seen now? Now that people, gay men have a word to kind of describe who they are or what they like to do in the bedroom or outside the bedroom, as the case may be.
Yeah, well, so I started a Facebook group. It's called Side Guys, and it's 2 years old now. We have 5,500 people, men all over the world, who will come in, and their very first thing is, I thought I was alone. I thought something was wrong with me. I was too ashamed to tell people. I've been, criticized on Grinder when I tell other people. So I think the number one thing it's done is normalize. It's okay. It's an option, and there's nothing pathological about it.
Yeah. And also I would add to this, we talked about the heteronormative piece of it, but I think anyone who has any sort of physical limitations, to be honest, no matter what their orientation is, sex for them may not be penetrative sex because it hurts, or because the medications or the medical illness that they have prevent them from doing any penetration, or they just don't like it, right? Just the same way. But it allows them to feel normal, that they are a sexual being. I think that's so, fabulous.
That's so well said. And that's really what I fought for within myself is I am a sexual being. I'm a very sexual being. I just don't like penetration. And I like what you're saying. I would love the word to filter into the straight community because you're right. I see straight couples and they every time I say that I feel like the kid in the sixth sense. I see straight people. Like people don't think I see straight people. But they absolutely have whatever their issues are, and some men have erectile disappointment that we call it in the field, or women have vaginal pain, or whatever it is, or maybe it could be from trauma. But even if it is, it should be able to be an option to say, I want to be sexual, but not in that way.
So, what do you think you and I and all of our colleagues who are sex therapists, what can be done to decenter penetrative sex as the gold standard, or as like the meaning, the definition of sex?
I love that question. That's such a good question. I mean, I feel like in the room at least, we need to be able to ask, in what's your sexual style and how are you sexual with each other, and if and to help, I guess, educate every single one that's coming through that it's if you're not well, like people will even say on social media, if you're not having intercourse, then you're roommates, you're not having sex, and just to be able to let people know that just touching each I mean for lesbians in American Couples by Pepper Schwartz, her team found that lesbians, they called it, not they weren't very sexual. She redid that study later and found that lesbians can do all kinds of things in bed or outside of bed sexually and not need intercourse, not need penetration, not even need orgasm. It's whatever you feel is sexual.
Right, right. I like the sexual style um, comment. I think that's great. So we're not even assuming. A lot of times we'll ask couples, right? When's the last time you had sex? We really should say, when was the last time you did something sexual, or something erotic, or something intimate, right? So that we give them like a wider menu, and they don't have to, because so many people, you're right, feel such shame about the fact that they're not being normal, right? Normal.
I really like that. And we always assume that in a heterosexual mixed sex relationship, the man's the top. but there's a lot of women that are the top who wear strap-ons and men want to get pegged. So we have to make room for that too.
Right. So when people come out, they're doing sort of step into the most authentic version of themselves, right? We say coming out. And you talk about the importance of discussing sexual preferences actually as part of that coming out process. So what kind of conversations do you imagine or you coach people to have with their intimate partners, whether they're in a long-term relationship or even a casual relationship?
Well, I always find that, in my experience, heterosexual couples have the greatest difficulty talking about these things, where gays and lesbians don't have as much, even bisexuals. Bisexuals, let me leave them out for a minute because they may have, if they're in a mixed sex relationship, they may struggle. But the same sex relationships, because we've worked so hard to come out and we've been forced to talk about our likes and dislikes and preferences, it's not as much of a struggle. I mean, especially gay guys, they'll do it right in the dating app. On your very first exposure to somebody, it'll say, before I even tell you I'm into romantic walks and going on the beach with you, this is what I want to do with you. And I feel like so many people, especially straight people, don't they think that's crass and they think it should be more organic.
Mm-hmm.
And it does. If that's the case, that doesn't always happen.
Yeah, right. And so it goes underground, is what happens. Or they give a sort of very slight hint of what they like to do in terms of their sexual behavior. And if the other partner either finds it insulting and they ignore it, or they miss it entirely and it goes above their heads, it lays underground because the message is if it's not acknowledged, it shouldn't be discussed. And there's something wrong with you. And so I've seen people where years down the line, a partner finally goes, I'm really into this kind of kink, and I'm not really being satisfied in this sexual relationship with you, and I would like to be. And the partner is sort of like thunderstruck, like, huh? We've been together 10 years, and now you're
Yeah.
talking about this?
Right? Or partners who make, yeah, they make assumptions. That I just actually did a video on this where the guy had said to his wife, I didn't think I could talk dirty with you in the bedroom because you're so religious and you read the Bible every day and I didn't want to offend you. And her response was, my Bible tells me I can do whatever I want with my own husband. That doesn't bother me to talk dirty. So
Oh,
people don't know. They just project and they're worried about shame.
right, right. So, what tips do you have for couples who have actually mismatched sexual preferences in terms of what they like to do, or even sexual identities, to find some sort of pleasurable intimacy? And maybe now you can also bring in the fact that you also do work with bisexual men quite a bit. That's one of the books you published.
Yes, yes. So yeah, so bisexuals often don't tell because they project, and sometimes it's true that the woman might think that he's really gay, and he isn't going to stay committed to her kind of thing. Um, but I guess what was your question again? I'm sorry, I lost the question.
What tips do you have for partners who actually maybe begin the conversation around their mismatched sexual preferences on
Okay.
how to accommodate them and
There's this is Go ahead.
and to find pleasurable intimacy? I guess I would add that.
Yeah, because so often people, I don't know if there's any order to this, but I often will say just because somebody wants to do something and there's a no in the room, the doesn't necessarily mean that there can't be options available. The yes is usually erased, and therapists will do this. Well, they said no, so no is no, and that's it. Well, that might be it to engage in the behavior together, but there's so many other options. Can you talk it through? Can you have fantasy talk? Can you go to the internet together? Can one of you go to the internet? Can you have an exchange on the internet with someone who is into it? Can you open your marriage? Might be the final, thing. And people get scared about these conversations, but they're conversations that are necessary to have, in my opinion.
I think you're right. And I think also people are afraid of, well, if we open the door, that Pandora's box, we're not sure where that's going to lead. And does that mean that that person is going to leave me? Does that mean that this person is not going to continue having the sex that I like? But I also coach people with that. And, there's a way in which, partners will agree to play, right? They'll agree to play dirty talk, even if it's not their primary, what I call erotic trigger, right? It's not their sort of mapping, sexual mapping, but they'll do it as a way of giving to their partner because they know how much it turns them on, right? So we do a lot of giving and receiving in our sexual intimate life that's not necessarily going on at the same time, overlapping.
I love that. And it's really differentiation, right? Really tolerating the differences, even erotically, which a lot of therapists they're okay with doing differentiation around housework, money, children raising, but when it comes to sex, they favor the person that is more of the no, rather than really letting the couple sit with the tension around what are we going to do then? Because can we invite erotic compassion? That's what I talk about,
Yeah,
right? For oneself and a partner.
right, right. I love that. So lastly, let me ask you this. So some of your work does, as I mentioned before, focus on the considerable stigma that bisexual and transgender folks face from
Hmm.
society at large and actually within their own LGBTQ community, and I would say the heterosexual community as well. So
Hmm.
why can we talk about the stigma that bisexual folks still have?
It's so awful. We say we're a community and we have Pride Day and you see us all together, but the truth is we're not a community. At the end of that day, gays go to their land, lesbians go to their land. Nobody wants the bisexuals, nobody wants the transgender. For bisexuals, they're often seen as wanting to keep a foot in heterosexual privilege. So they get unfriended, they get invited to less parties. It's really they're seen similar to the straight community that they can't commit, they can't make up their mind. People just can't accept that there are people that can have erotic energy and relationship energy, emotional energy toward more than one gender.
I also wonder, Joe, if it's also kind of residue from two different sociopolitical movements. One is the gay liberation movement, where it was a movement and it took a lot of sacrifice and energy and work in order for gay people to be recognized and acknowledged and given the rights, including gay marriage, which is now kind of potentially under siege. So
Mm-hmm.
that's like one stream. And then the other stream that I've thought about a lot about in this question is the whole era of AIDS, in which to be bisexual, it was hard enough to be gay. But then if you're bisexual, there's this
Mm.
ethical, moral dilemma that you have about who are you hurting potentially by having sex with, both women and men. I mean, so I guess I wanted to bring that up to get your thoughts on it.
Well, it's like I was going to say this earlier. You know how people think if we open up the doors to erotic differences and talk about that, then it's going to progress to something. That's our cultural myth um, that we can't have a fantasy or an interest and stick to one layer or one level. That we're going to progress because people confuse evolution, evolving, to progression. Like someone can't control themselves. That's the same with bisexual. They can make a commitment just like anyone else can make a commitment. And people don't understand that. They see it as no, then you're not getting your needs met, so you're going to want to satisfy yourself in that other realm, which isn't true.
So what do you think? What have you done, or what have you seen like some other activists do to decrease the discrimination against bisexual and trans individuals?
By more and more coming out and letting people understand it and know it, and advocacy and education, and really just talking about. Um, that's a great question. I don't know. I mean, I talk about it because I'm a ally, right? But even then, the bisexual community is fighting to survive. They will often accuse people, and even me sometimes, of being a bi erasure because I'll say that straight men can have sex with men. You know that part of my work I do, and they think that that's bisexual. And so there's everyone's fighting, everyone's gatekeeping. Wait a minute, you're taking away my label. No, we're just adding understandings of other labels.
Yeah, yeah. And what do you think about we're of similar generations, and I wonder about the use. I do think actually fewer people, I think the research shows fewer people identify as bi, as opposed to more people, an increasing number of people identifying as queer, which I think is
Yes.
curious in terms of our language, in terms of identity. And I think I think queer is a very interesting term because I think it covers so many um, beliefs and identifications, including whether it's your identity or your orientation or your political leanings or you. So I'm curious about kind of how you see it in terms of a progression, sociology wise, you know?
I love it actually. I didn't at first because I was called queer in school and I was made fun of and chased by the bullies. And so queer to me, it took me a long, 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 long time to be okay with that whole term. And then once I did, then it started like expanding. Like you said, I've had straight clients say they self-identify as queer, and it's exactly what you said. It gives them wiggle room. And it invites you to say, well, what does queer mean for you? So that people can talk about their boutique identities and not be labeled and boxed into some other label.
Right. It seems like the younger generations that have followed us have created a lot. I mean, there's the queer sort of umbrella term, but I think there's so many identifications underlying that for very nuanced feelings. What do you think
Yes.
about that?
I love it. I love that kids are doing this, and I know that there are researchers that are upset because they're upset with the kids doing this. But I say to the researchers, then you do it. Then start talking about because there is so many nuances to being a sexual being, to being a gendered being, and they're struggling with showing up as to who they are. So I love it. I love listening to them and learning from them.
Right. Yeah, and being curious because a lot of times I don't know what someone will come in with a new label that I haven't heard of, and I'll have to look it up and I'll ask them. So tell me what it means to you, right?
Yes. Right.
Uh,
I don't assume anything anymore.
right. Um, so let's just finish up between talking about how people talk about sexual styles or interests or even fantasies,
Hmm.
and the interplay with not allowing oneself to express those and the impact on mental health, because we are seeing a mental health crisis since COVID. Um,
Hmm.
what do what could you say about, because we see a lot of people who are
Hmm.
really suffering
I
because of
know.
the internal and external prisons, I would say, in terms of their giving themselves permission, or what I call sex esteem, not having it to really just speak about what you're interested in. So
Hmm.
what do you see as kind of these sort of crossover links, bridges between sexual health and pleasure and mental health?
First of all, I want to tell you I love that you coined that term, sex esteem, and I think it's brilliant when you take two words and put them together, and it makes a whole idea about it. Like I just love that actually. And I wrote a little booklet. I did it for my clients, and then I thought I'm going to sell it on Amazon. It's only about 50, 60 pages. It's called Erotic Orientation. And here's what I would to answer your question. We have a sexual orientation, to whom we're attracted. We have an erotic orientation, the things that get us off, the things that bring us to orgasm, and they're just as deeply embedded a part of us as our sexual orientation is. So mental illness can happen to anybody when you're suppressing, repressing, hiding. You know, like what Jack Moran, that the late sex therapist, said: when you go to war with your sexuality, you'll lose and cause more trouble than you started. I feel that way about the erotic, and I feel that way about the sexual orientation.
Yeah, yeah. And so I think a lot of people, when they come to a sex therapist, they don't realize that a good, solid sex therapist has very deep underpinnings and foundations, or should in anyway, in general psychotherapy and mental health, because obviously we're in agreement that they're so intertwined. And I love that quote from Jack Moran, who wrote the beautiful book, The Erotic Mind, as well as others. So I think that's a great way to end this conversation. And I'm so pleased that you were able to make the time to be on Sex Esteem. And do you want to just let people know where they can find you on social media, your site, your
Hmm.
practice?
Yep. So they can always go to any. Um, I'm on Instagram, I'm on Twitter, I'm on TikTok, I'm on LinkedIn and Facebook, and the handle is at Dr. Joe Kort. DrJoeKort. And then I have a website, joekort.com.
Great. All right. Thanks, Joe.
Thanks for having me. It's so nice seeing you.
Really, really nice. And